Family Service Center came to learn about these rocks that have messages of hope on them because one of our clients, who was out on her first ever date, she was an 18-year-old client at FSC, came across one. And she came into her therapy session and said, you know, I found this rock that was decorated and had this message of hope on it. And she described that on the backside there was information and resources for people who were struggling emotionally, including the Suicide Lifeline. Was seen by an FSC therapist for a significant amount of time, about 8 or 9 months at that point. And so what was meaningful about that and her finding it is that she was initially referred to FSC for a health and safety assessment. She was identified by her school as someone who was having significant challenges and was a risk to herself and her own safety. So she came to FSC, the social worker from her school called up to see if she could come in and be evaluated. And she was seen the same day at FSC. And the person who evaluated her talks about this and says that this was a kiddo who was 17 at the time, who talked about feeling afraid of living and more comfortable with the idea of death, and actually used the language of death is more compatible for me than life. So she was experiencing a great deal of emotional pain. She had a significant trauma history, and she really didn't know herself, and was just really struggling to get through. And so, you know, the person who evaluated her recommended that she participate in treatment, and she was really resistant to that idea, and was just really concerned about being told that this wasn't an option and that it wasn't okay for her to feel that way. And the evaluator communicated to her, you know, that it wasn't the evaluator's place to say it's not okay, and that there was a wish to be able to help her to think about other options. So the idea was that she was pretty, she had tunnel vision around, I'm in a lot of pain, my only way out is this focus on death by suicide. And so the evaluator talked to her about the therapeutic process is about figuring out how to manage that pain, how to address the source of that pain, and considering widening and broadening her horizons, broadening her options, and understanding ways in which she can live as opposed to die. She participated in treatment pretty regularly, well, really regularly, for about 8 or 9 months. The time she found that rock is about 8 months in. And, you know, she had talked about having a plan to plan her death by suicide. And when that date approached, a higher level of care was involved. So her FSC therapist engaged her in getting an evaluation to be seen more frequently at a higher level of care outside of FSC, while also being connected to FSC. So that treatment involved collaboration among a number of providers, including a psychiatrist and a higher level of care provider. And then she stepped back down to FSC for individual therapy as well. She made a great deal of progress. She was able to address some of her trauma history. She was able to develop coping skills to manage her pain differently. And it was really about a month before she was headed off to college that she was on this first date, exploring life differently than she, I think, ever thought she might have. And she came across this rock. And so that was really meaningful that she, of all people, came across this rock, because she was pretty focused on death by suicide and not on living. The back end of that therapeutic process involved the client and her therapist working together to paint rocks and write messages of hope, and to include the information, Suicide Lifeline, and how to get help. It was a pretty successful process for her, and she went off to college.
Do you keep in touch with her now?
You know what? FSC was able to have contact with her after she went to college. She went to school out of state, so FSC wasn't able to continue to follow her out there. But when she came home for holidays, and when she came home for the summer between her freshman or sophomore year, her therapist, she met with her therapist, and per her therapist's report, she's actually doing quite well. She made friends, she connected with her community. She had a real clear vision of moving forward and exploring life was her goal, as opposed to identifying ways to die.
FSC would like to acknowledge the organization that inspired this. Keegan's Rocks is a rock painting group started by Kim Belle-Isle in honor of her son Keegan, who lost his battle with depression and died from suicide on April 6, 2017. Information about the group can be found on Facebook. Search Keegan's Rocks.